Let's switch over to politics because you're now trying to do something different outside of the sports market, right?
Yeah, I've been doing it. I've been on MSNBC, I've been on CNN, been on Fox News Channel talking politics. I fully anticipate to be connected with one of those channels in the very, very near future on a full-time basis. I'm certainly not going to go away from sports completely because that's my bread and butter. That's what I do. That's what I know. But at the same time, I'm 41 years old. I'm a daddy. I'm going to be a husband sometime in the near future. I pay a mortgage. I pay taxes. And I care about things that are going on in our community. I'm aware of what's going on with the health or universal health care issue and our President Barack Obama. I'm also aware of the fact that we've got a 9.5% or 9.4% unemployment rate that's at 14.7% when it comes to the African American community. So I have concerns about a lot of these things, and I think that you need somebody out there of African American descent that has that bully pulpit to speak on these issues, and that's a challenge that I'm willing to accept.
All right, speaking of universal health care, can you tell us what your thoughts are of President Obama's his proposal?
Well, first of all, I support our president from the standpoint of what his agenda is. His goal of having universal health care, of having health care coverage for all Americans is, I think, an admirable thing. I'm not so sure I like his plan. He talks about how, he wants to have a public plan and that he's not trying to give or veer people away from their private insurance. But the reality is if you have a public option, then you are giving employers an incentive to send their employees to the public option so they don't have to pay for it. That's a roundabout way of nationalizing health care. When you consider the fact that we've got a national deficit of over $11 trillion when he inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit. When you consider the fact that it's universal health care, before that it was a cap and trade. Before that it was the omnibus bill for $410 billion. Before that, it was a stimulus package for $787 billion. The reality is that we're talking about our children and grandchildren that are going to have to pay this bill. And ultimately, what you're leaning towards is more government intervention and government control. And I think that when you look at the African American community, what a lot of people don't realize, whether it was Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, etc., what they all preached was government intervention to make sure that the system of capitalism was operated on a fair and even playing field. It didn't say to give the government complete control over our lives. I don't trust the government. I don't want them to have control. I trust Barack Obama. I don't trust the government. And last time I checked, he's the president for 4 years. If he pulls it off, he'll be the president for 8 years. But what about his successors? What about the people that are going to follow him? When you give the government this kind of institutional control, what are we talking about here? It definitely ain't capitalism, and that's a concern that I have.
Okay. Let's talk briefly about the Henry Louis Gates situation.
Yep.
I'm down in Boston. What are your opinions on this?
Well, first, when the Gates situation went down with Officer Crowley in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I definitely thought it was racial profiling. I definitely thought that he was justified in being a bit upset and agitated by this police officer. But as the days went on, I became more disgusted with Professor Gates. Number one, because he was quoted as telling the officer, "Do you know who I am?" Number two, because he clearly reached out to the President of the United States. Every black person in America doesn't have the president or Oprah as their friend. Every black person in America hasn't been honored by a former president, Bill Clinton. Okay? So when you take all of those things into consideration and you consider the way that he acted, how does it benefit us? You talked about racial profiling, but ultimately this bogus meeting with this beer fest at the White House between himself, the officer, and President Obama, what does that do for us? You're talking about racial profiling here, but ultimately at the end of the day, really was it? Or was it just you being distraught and upset and getting a bit cantankerous because you were upset at how this particular officer approached you? I'm not thinking about Professor Gates. I'm thinking about the young brother out there who's going to get pulled over by a cop. Do you get belligerent with that cop? Can you pick up the phone and call the president? Can you pick up the phone and call Oprah? You can't pull it off. The reality is that that's what Professor Gates should have been thinking about. This is a man that's an iconic figure within the African American community. He's an African American scholar. He's assigned to teach young minds how to conduct themselves under situations of duress. By acting this way, what kind of example were you setting? So as the days went by, I went from thinking about racial profiling to being completely disgusted with the Professor, because I couldn't believe he allowed this situation to escalate to this point where ultimately it embarrassed the president, because he came to your defense thinking that you were racially profiled instead of looking at you and saying, oh, you was just being belligerent because you were annoyed. I've had the police come to my house when my alarm went off. You know what I did? When they tell me to show the ID, I showed my damn ID. This is my house. This is who I am. This is where I'm at, and that's it. I didn't get cantankerous. You understand? I didn't get belligerent. He should have known better.
Okay. What about Judge Sotomayor being appointed as the first Latino woman for the Supreme Court?
I love it. I love the fact that I think she was clearly qualified. 17 years on the federal bench and an appellate court. She had a phenomenal record. The Republicans knew it. The Democrats knew it. They were just politicizing the situation because they're worried about who the president is going to select in the future, because they're expecting another Supreme Court justice to retire before Obama's administration comes to an end. So I don't think that it was anything about her record. I think she was clearly qualified. I think that when you consider her story coming from the projects, ultimately ascending to being a Supreme Court Associate Justice, I think it's a phenomenal story, and I think it sends a message to the rest of America that we have no excuses. You have an African-American president, you have the first Hispanic on the Supreme Court. There is no question that times have changed. Certainly we've got our issues, we've got our problems, but she's phenomenal. Our president, he's got challenges, he's trying to handle his business, but clearly no matter what roadblocks are in front of us, we can overcome them if we do things the right way. And I think her nomination has basically solidified that emphatically.